The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the general store, and Josephine Reeves stepped down into the dust of Malad City, Idaho, her Boston shoes hitting the dry earth like a declaration of war against common sense. It was August 1878, and the sun beat down on the frontier town with the kind of relentless heat that made even the locals squint and search for shade. While Josephine stood there in her traveling dress with its tight bodice and layers of petticoats, looking like she had taken a wrong turn somewhere around civilization and stumbled into hell by mistake. Yates Emerson was loading sacks of feed onto his wagon when he saw her, and something about the way she held herself, chin up despite the obvious discomfort, made him pause mid-motion. He had been working his ranch outside town for 5 years now, ever since he turned 20, and he had seen plenty of settlers come through Malad City. Most of them took one look at the harsh landscape, the endless sagebrush stretching toward mountains that seemed perpetually out of reach, and climbed right back onto whatever had brought them. This woman, though, she had a different look in her eyes. Fear, yes, but also something stubborn. "Lord have mercy," Martha Bennett said from the porch of her boarding house, loud enough for half the street to hear. "What kind of fool woman comes out here dressed like that? She will not last a week." Josephine heard the words clearly, as she was meant to. She turned her green eyes toward the older woman and tried to smile, but it came out trembling at the edges. She had known this would be difficult. Her brother Thomas had written to her about the opportunity, about the teaching position at the small schoolhouse, about how she could make a fresh start after the scandal that had ruined her prospects back in Massachusetts. What he had not written about was the heat, the dust, the way the wind seemed to carry hostility along with the smell of livestock and sage. "Can I help you, miss?" Yates found himself speaking before he had fully decided to get involved. He set down the feed sack and walked toward her, his boots stirring small clouds of dust with each step. Josephine looked at him properly then, taking in his sun-darkened skin, his worn work clothes, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar beneath his hat. He was young, maybe her age or a few years older, with blue eyes that seemed kind despite the weathered quality of his face. "I am looking for the schoolhouse," she said, and her voice was steady even though her hands trembled slightly where they gripped her small traveling bag. "I am the new teacher." A ripple of reaction went through the small crowd that had gathered to watch the stagecoach arrival, more muttering, more doubt. The last teacher had quit after 2 months, unable to handle the isolation and the rough children of ranchers and miners who saw little use for book learning. "I will show you," Yates said, surprising himself again. "It is just down the street. Do you have more luggage?" "2 trunks," Josephine said. "The driver said he would bring them to the boarding house." "That would be Martha's place," Yates said, nodding toward the woman who had spoken so unkindly. "But let me show you the school first. You will want to see what you are working with." They walked together through the dusty street, past the saloon where a few men sat on the porch watching with open curiosity, past the blacksmith shop where the clang of hammer on anvil rang out in steady rhythm, past the small church with its plain wooden cross. Josephine tried not to show how overwhelmed she felt, how different everything was from the tree-lined streets of Boston with their brick buildings and familiar sounds. "How long have you been here?" she asked Yates, partly to fill the silence and partly because she genuinely wanted to know how someone survived in a place like this. 5 years come September," he said. "My father died when I was 19, left me the ranch. It was not much then, just 100 acres and a cabin that leaked when it rained. I have built it up some since." "Do you like it here?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He glanced at her, then back at the road ahead. "I do not know that like is the right word. It is hard. sometimes harder than anything I could have imagined. But it is mine, you know. Every fence I mend, every calf I raise, every acre I improve, it is mine. That means something. They reached the schoolhouse, a small wooden building that looked like it might blow over in a strong wind. Josephine stopped in front of it, and Yates watched her face carefully for signs that she was about to give up before she even started. Instead, she squared her shoulders and walked up the 2 steps to the door. Inside, the single room smelled of dust and neglect. There were rough wooden benches for the students, a small desk at the front, a slate board on the wall that had seen better days. The windows were dirty, and the floor looked like it had not been swept in months. "Oh," Josephine said softly, and for a moment Yates thought she might cry. But then she set down her bag and walked to the center of the room, turning slowly to take it all in. "It needs work." "That is one way to put it," Yates said. "I could help you clean it up if you want. Tomorrow, maybe, after I finish my morning chores." "Why would you do that?" Josephine asked, turning to face him directly. "You do not know me." "No," Yates agreed. "But I know what it is like to be new here, to have everyone watching and waiting for you to fail. When I first started working my father's ranch, every old-timer in the valley was sure I would lose it within a year. Some of them even told me so to my face. It made me angry, but it also made me determined." "Is that what you think I need, to be angry?" "I think you need someone to believe you can do this," Yates said. "At least until you believe it yourself." Josephine looked at him for a long moment, and something passed between them, some recognition of shared stubbornness perhaps, or shared loneliness. "Thank you," she said finally. "I would appreciate the help." They walked back to the boarding house together as the afternoon heat began to ease slightly. Martha Bennett was waiting on the porch, her arms crossed and her expression sour. "Room is $3 a week, meals included. No men visitors, no noise after 9 o'clock, no washing clothes in your room." "That seems reasonable," Josephine said, though $3 was more than she had hoped to pay. Her savings from Boston would not last long at that rate. "Yates Emerson, you should not be filling this girl's head with false hope," Martha said sharply. "She is not cut out for this life. Anyone can see that." "Anyone can see she just got here," Yates replied, his voice calm but firm. "Maybe give her a chance before you write her off." He tipped his hat to Josephine and headed back toward his wagon, leaving her to face Martha's disapproval alone. But as Josephine climbed the stairs to her small, sparse room, she found herself thinking about what he had said. "Someone to believe you can do this." The words echoed in her mind as she unpacked her few belongings, as she lay down on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, as she listened to the unfamiliar sounds of a frontier town settling into evening. The next morning, Josephine woke before dawn to the sound of roosters and the distant lowing of cattle being driven somewhere. She dressed in her simplest dress, though even that was far too fancy for Malad City, and went downstairs to breakfast. The dining room held 4 other boarders, all men who worked at the nearby mines or ranches. They stopped talking when she entered, and their stares made her feel like some exotic creature on display. "Morning, miss," one of them said finally, an older man with a grizzled beard. "Heard you are the new schoolteacher." "Yes," Josephine said, taking a seat at the far end of the table. "School starts in 2 weeks. My boy will be there," another man said. "Name is Samuel. He is 10, and he is not much for sitting still, but his mother wanted him to learn to read before she passed. I would appreciate it if you could teach him that." The simple request, spoken with obvious emotion, touched something in Josephine. "I will do my best," she promised. After breakfast, she walked back to the schoolhouse, carrying a bucket and some rags she had purchased at the general store. She had expected to work alone, so she was surprised to find Yates already there, his wagon parked outside and his sleeves rolled up. "You came," she said. "I said I would." He had brought more supplies, a broom, some boards to repair the broken window frame, nails, and a hammer. "I figured we could start with the worst of it and work our way down." They spent the morning cleaning, and Josephine found the physical work strangely satisfying. Yates proved to be good company, telling her stories about the town and its inhabitants as they worked. She learned that the banker, Mr. Peterson, had once been a fur trapper, that the woman who ran the general store had walked across the plains with her family when she was just a girl, that the minister of the small church had been a soldier in the war before finding religion and heading west. "Everyone here has a story," Yates said as he hammered a board into place. "Most of them are not pretty. But people come to the frontier to remake themselves, to be something different than what they were. Maybe that is what you are doing too." "Maybe," Josephine said, scrubbing at a particularly stubborn stain on the floor. She wanted to tell him about Boston, about the married man who had courted her with lies, about the scandal when his wife found out, about the way society had turned on her as if she were the only guilty party. But it felt too raw, too shameful still. They worked through the afternoon, and by the time the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, the schoolhouse looked almost respectable. The windows were clean, the floor was swept, the benches were arranged in neat rows. Josephine stood in the doorway and felt a small spark of hope. "Thank you," she said to Yates, who was loading his tools back into the wagon. "I could not have done this without you." "You could have," he said. "It just would have taken longer. Will you be ready for the first day?" "I hope so. I need to prepare lessons, figure out what supplies I have, meet with the parents." The list felt overwhelming when she said it out loud. "Take it one day at a time," Yates advised. "That is the only way to survive out here." Over the next 2 weeks, Josephine threw herself into preparation. She visited families around town and on the nearby ranches, meeting the children who would be her students. There were 12 in all, ranging from 6-year-old Lucy Peterson to 15-year-old Jacob Miller, who was nearly as tall as Yates and looked like he would rather be anywhere than in a schoolroom. The families were wary of her at first, this fancy Eastern woman with her proper speech and her city ways. But Josephine listened to them, asked questions about their children, promised to work hard to give them a real education. Slowly, cautiously, some of them began to warm to her. Yates stopped by the schoolhouse several times during those weeks, always with some excuse. He needed to pick up supplies at the general store anyway. He was heading into town to see the blacksmith and thought he would check if she needed anything. He had extra lumber from a project and wondered if she could use it for bookshelves. Josephine began to look forward to his visits, to the sound of his boots on the steps, to the easy way he had of making her feel less alone. They talked about everything and nothing, about the weather and the crops, about books she had read and places he wanted to see someday. She learned that he loved his ranch but sometimes felt isolated out there by himself. He learned that she missed the ocean, missed the smell of salt air and the cry of gulls. "Why did you really come here?" he asked one evening as they sat on the schoolhouse steps, watching the sun set over the mountains. Josephine was quiet for a long moment. "I made a mistake back in Boston," she said finally. "A terrible mistake that hurt people and ruined my reputation. My brother thought a fresh start would be good for me, somewhere no one knew my story." "You want to tell me what happened?" "Not particularly." She looked at him, trying to gauge his reaction. "Does that bother you?" "No," Yates said. "We all have things we would rather leave in the past. What matters is what you do from here." That is a generous way to look at it. I am a practical man, not a generous one. The past is done. The only thing any of us can control is what comes next. School started on a Monday in September, and Josephine stood in front of her 12 students with her heart pounding so hard she was sure they could hear it. Some of them looked curious, some bored, some openly skeptical. Little Lucy Peterson clutched her slate like a lifeline. Jacob Miller slouched in the back row with his arms crossed. "Good morning," Josephine said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "My name is Miss Reeves, and I am very happy to be your teacher. I know some of you may not want to be here. You may think school is a waste of time when there is work to be done at home, but I promise you that what we learn in this room will matter. Reading, writing, arithmetic, these are not just subjects in a book. They are tools that will help you build better lives." She saw a few of the students sit up a little straighter. Encouraged, she continued, "I also promise to make this interesting. We will not just copy from books. We will read stories and write our own. We will solve problems that matter to your lives. And I will listen to you, to your ideas and your questions." The first day was chaotic. The younger children squirmed and whispered. The older ones tested her boundaries, asking difficult questions and talking back when she tried to correct them. By the time she dismissed them at 3 o'clock, Josephine felt exhausted and discouraged, but she came back the next day and the day after that. Slowly, gradually, she began to find her rhythm. She learned that Samuel, the 10-year-old whose father had spoken to her at breakfast, was bright but easily distracted. She learned that Lucy was shy but loved stories about animals. She learned that Jacob only acted tough because he was embarrassed about how poorly he read, and that he softened considerably when she worked with him privately. The town watched her progress with varying degrees of interest and skepticism. Martha Bennett continued to predict her failure. The saloon keeper, a man named Frank who had been surprisingly kind to her, took bets on how long she would last. The general store owner, Mrs. Harrison, started saving her old newspapers so the children would have more to read. And Yates continued to visit, though less often now that she was busy with school. He came on Saturday afternoon sometimes, when she was planning lessons for the following week. He came on Sunday evenings when the store was closed and the town was quiet. They fell into an easy friendship, though Josephine sometimes caught him looking at her in a way that made her pulse quicken. "The children are talking about you," he told her one Saturday in late September, "saying you are the best teacher they have ever had." "They have not had many teachers to compare me to," Josephine said, but she was pleased, "though I think we are starting to understand each other." "You did it," Yates said. "You proved everyone wrong." "Not everyone. Martha still thinks I will run back to Boston at the first sign of winter." "Then you will just have to prove her wrong too." October brought cooler weather and the first hints of the harsh winter to come. Josephine bought warmer clothes at the general store, practical dresses made of sturdy fabric that would not have been acceptable in Boston but were perfect for Malad City. She learned to bank the fire in the schoolhouse stove so it would not go out during the day. She learned which families would welcome her for Sunday dinner and which preferred to keep to themselves. She also learned that her feelings for Yates had grown into something more than friendship. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments, remembering the way he smiled when something genuinely amused him, the way his hands looked when he was working on something, the way he listened to her like what she said actually mattered. It was the minister's wife, a woman named Sarah who had been kind to Josephine from the start, who finally said something. "Yates Emerson is a good man," she said one Sunday after church. "The best kind. Steady, honest, hard-working. Any woman would be lucky to have him." "I am sure that is true," Josephine said carefully. "He is lonely out on that ranch by himself, has been ever since his father died. He needs someone to share his life with, someone who understands what it means to build something from nothing." Sarah looked at Josephine meaningfully. Someone like you, perhaps. Sarah, I cannot think about such things. I am here to teach, to make a new life for myself. I cannot afford to make another mistake. Falling in love is not a mistake, dear. What happened in Boston, whatever it was, that is over. You are allowed to move forward. But Josephine was not sure she was ready. The wounds from Boston were still too fresh, the shame still too close to the surface. She had trusted a man who lied to her, who used her, and then discarded her when the truth came out. How could she trust her own judgment again? The answer came in November, during a crisis that tested everything Josephine had learned about survival and self-reliance. It started with Lucy Peterson running into the schoolhouse one morning, tears streaming down her face. Miss Reeves, the little girl sobbed. My mama is sick. Really sick. Papa does not know what to do. Josephine dismissed the other children and walked Lucy home, her heart racing. Mrs. Peterson was indeed very ill, burning with fever and barely conscious. The banker, for all his business acumen, was utterly lost in the face of his wife's illness. The doctor is in Pocatello, he said desperately. That is 2 days away, maybe more. I cannot leave her, but I cannot help her either. I will go, Josephine heard herself say. I will ride to Pocatello and bring back the doctor. You. Mr. Peterson looked at her like she had suggested flying to the moon. Miss Reeves, you cannot ride that far. It is dangerous, especially for a woman alone. Then I will not go alone. Josephine was already moving, already planning. Mr. Peterson, I need you to stay with your wife and keep her as cool as you can. I will be back as soon as possible. She ran to Yates's ranch, 5 miles outside of town, barely noticing the burning in her lungs or the pain in her side. She found him in the barn, working on a broken wagon wheel. Yates, she gasped, startling him. I need your help. Mrs. Peterson is very sick. We need to get to Pocatello to bring back the doctor. He did not hesitate, did not ask foolish questions. Let me saddle the horses. Can you ride? I learned as a child. I am not very good, but I can manage. Good enough. He moved with efficient speed, preparing 2 horses and packing supplies. Within 20 minutes, they were riding hard toward Pocatello, Josephine clinging to her saddle and praying she would not fall off. They rode through the afternoon and into the evening, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. Josephine had never been so uncomfortable in her life. Every part of her body ached. Her legs screamed in protest. Her hands were raw from gripping the reins. But she kept going, kept pushing, because a woman's life depended on it. Yates watched her with a mixture of concern and admiration. This was not the frightened city woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 2 months ago. This was someone fierce and determined, someone who refused to give up even when everything in her must be screaming to stop. They reached Pocatello late that night and found the doctor, a weary man named Dr. Morrison, who packed his bag without complaint and followed them back toward Malad City. The return journey was even harder because Josephine was already exhausted, already pushed beyond what she thought she could endure. At one point, she swayed in her saddle and Yates reached out to steady her. We can rest, he said, just for a little while. No, Josephine said through gritted teeth. Mrs. Peterson does not have time for us to rest. We keep going. They arrived back in Malad City just after dawn, having ridden through the entire night. Doctor. Morrison went immediately to the Peterson house while Josephine and Yates stood in the street, too tired to move. You did it, Yates said softly. You rode 40 miles there and back. I did not think that was possible. I did not think so either, Josephine admitted. Her whole body was trembling now that the adrenaline was wearing off. But it had to be done. Come on, Yates said, putting a gentle hand on her back. Let me get you to the boarding house before you fall over. But word of what Josephine had done spread through the town faster than they could walk. By the time they reached Martha's boarding house, a small crowd had gathered. People who had doubted her, who had predicted her failure, who had watched her with skeptical eyes for 2 months, now looked at her with something like respect. "That was a brave thing you did," Mr. Harrison from the general store said. "A remarkable thing." "Anyone would have done the same," Josephine said, embarrassed by the attention. "No," Martha Bennett said, speaking up from her porch. The older woman's face was softer than Josephine had ever seen it. "Not anyone. Most would have been too afraid. You have more steel in you than I gave you credit for." Dr. Morrison emerged from the Peterson house an hour later with good news. Mrs. Peterson would recover, thanks to the medicine he had brought and the fact that they had gotten to him in time. Lucy came running out to hug Josephine, nearly knocking her over. "You saved my mama," the little girl said, tears on her face. "Thank you, Miss Reeves. Thank you." Josephine hugged her back, and something broke open inside her chest, some hard knot of fear and doubt that had been there since Boston. She had done this. She had faced something terrifying and survived. She had not failed. That evening, after she had slept for a few hours and bathed and changed into clean clothes, Yates came to the boarding house. Martha actually smiled and told Josephine she had a visitor, waiving the rules about men for once. They sat on the porch in the fading light, not touching but close enough that Josephine could feel the warmth of him. "You were amazing," Yates said. "The whole town is talking about it. I think you have finally won them over." "I was terrified," Josephine admitted. "The whole ride, I kept thinking I could not do it, that I was going to fall off or give up or fail somehow. But then I would think about Lucy's face, about Mrs. Peterson, and I would keep going." "That is courage," Yates said. "Being afraid but doing it anyway." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars come out one by one. Finally, Yates spoke again, his voice low and careful. "Josephine, I need to tell you something. I have been wanting to say it for weeks now, but I did not want to push you or make you uncomfortable." Josephine's heart started to pound. "What is it?" "I am in love with you." He said it simply, without flourish or poetry, and somehow that made it even more powerful. "I think I have been since the day you arrived, since I saw you standing in the street with your chin up and your eyes fierce. I know you came here to escape something, to start over. I know you might not feel the same way, but I had to tell you, had to let you know that someone sees you for who you really are and loves what he sees." Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes. "Yates, I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything right now. I just wanted you to know. I will wait, for as long as it takes, until you are ready. And if you are never ready, if you only ever want to be friends, I will accept that too. But I had to be honest with you." Josephine reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. His hand was rough and calloused, so different from the soft hands of the men she had known in Boston. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I trusted someone before, and he betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. The scandal destroyed everything I had built in Boston. I am terrified of making the same mistake again." "I am not him," Yates said gently. "Whatever happened in Boston, whatever some man did to hurt you, I am not that person. I would never lie to you or use you or hurt you intentionally. All I can offer you is my word, my honesty, and the promise that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of your trust." "I know you are not him," Josephine said. "In my head I know that, but my heart is still healing." "Then let it heal," Yates said. "I am not going anywhere." Winter came to Malad City in earnest after that, bringing snow and bitter cold that made Josephine grateful for her warm dresses and the reliable stove in the schoolhouse. Teaching became more challenging as some of the children could not make it to school during the worst weather, but Josephine adapted, giving them work to do at home and reviewing when they returned. She and Yates grew closer during those winter months, though they took things slowly. He visited when the weather allowed, bringing firewood for her room at the boarding house or helping her prepare the schoolhouse each morning. They had long conversations about everything and nothing, building trust and understanding brick by careful brick. In December, Yates invited her to his ranch for the first time. Josephine rode out on a clear, cold Sunday afternoon, her breath making clouds in the air. The ranch was modest but well-maintained, a sturdy cabin with a barn and several outbuildings, corrals for the horses and cattle, fields that would be green in summer but now lay dormant under snow. "This is it," Yates said, almost shyly. "Not much to look at in winter, but come spring it is beautiful. The grass comes up green, the wildflowers bloom, and you can see clear to the mountains." "I think it is beautiful now," Josephine said honestly. There was something peaceful about the landscape, something clean and true that appealed to her. Inside, the cabin was warm and surprisingly tidy. Yates had clearly cleaned before her arrival, and Josephine found that touching. He made coffee and they sat by the fire, and for the first time Josephine could picture what a life here might look like. Waking up to this view every morning, working alongside Yates to build something together. Raising children who would grow up tough and capable, shaped by this unforgiving but honest land. "What are you thinking?" Yates asked, watching her face. "I am thinking that I am happy," Josephine said, surprised by the realization. "Actually happy in a way I have not been in years, maybe ever." "I am glad." He reached for her hand, and this time Josephine did not hesitate to give it to him. "You belong here, Josephine. I knew it that first day, even when you did not know it yourself. You believed in me," she said softly. "When the whole town thought I would fail, when I thought I might fail, you believed in me. That made all the difference." Christmas came, and the town held a small celebration in the church. Josephine's students performed a program she had helped them prepare, reciting poems and singing songs. Their parents beamed with pride, and several people thanked Josephine for the work she was doing. Afterward, Yates walked her back to the boarding house through the snow. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small package from his coat pocket. "It is not much, but I wanted you to have it." Inside was a leather-bound journal, the pages blank and waiting. "For your thoughts," Yates said. "For the stories you want to tell. I know you miss writing, you mentioned it once." Josephine pressed the journal to her chest, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you, I love it." "And I love you," Yates said. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle. "I'm going to keep saying it until you believe it, until you believe that this is real and good and something you deserve." "I am starting to believe it," Josephine whispered. "I am starting to believe in a lot of things." He kissed her then, soft and sweet under the falling snow, and Josephine felt something inside her finally let go. The fear, the shame, the weight of her past mistakes, all of it loosened its grip just enough for her to breathe freely. January and February were harsh, with storms that sometimes kept Josephine confined to the boarding house for days at a time. But whenever the weather cleared, Yates was there, checking on her, making sure she had everything she needed. The other boarders teased her good-naturedly about her cowboy, and even Martha smiled when she saw them together. In March, as the snow began to melt and the first hints of spring appeared, Yates asked Josephine to marry him. They were at his ranch, watching the sun set over the mountains, and he turned to her with nervous hope in his eyes. "I know we have not been courting very long by traditional standards," he said, "but I know my heart, and I know what I want. I want to spend my life with you, Josephine. I want to build something together, to face whatever comes as partners. I want to give you the home and the happiness you deserve. Will you marry me?" Josephine looked at him, at this good man who had believed in her when she could not believe in herself, who had been patient with her fears and gentle with her wounds, who had shown her through actions, not words, what love could really mean. "Yes," she said, and the word came out strong and certain. "Yes, I will marry you." They married in April in the small church with most of the town in attendance. Josephine wore a simple dress she had made herself, altered from one of her Boston gowns, and carried wildflowers that Yates had picked that morning. She had never felt more beautiful than when she saw the way he looked at her, like she was precious and brave and exactly what he had always wanted. Sarah played the piano, and Lucy Peterson stood up as flower girl, scattering petals down the aisle with serious concentration. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about the challenges they would face and the strength they would need. And when Yates kissed his bride, the congregation clapped and cheered because this was a frontier wedding after all, and frontier folks were not shy about expressing their joy. The reception was held at the saloon, which Frank had cleaned up and decorated for the occasion. There was food and music and dancing, and Josephine found herself surrounded by people who had become her community, her family. Martha Bennett hugged her and whispered that she had been wrong, that Josephine was exactly the kind of woman the frontier needed. Mr. Peterson thanked her again for saving his wife's life and said he would be forever grateful. As the evening wound down, Yates and Josephine rode back to the ranch together, to the home that was now theirs. Yates carried her over the threshold, and Josephine laughed at the old-fashioned gesture even as she appreciated it. "Welcome home, Mrs. Emerson," he said, setting her down gently. "Mrs. Emerson," Josephine repeated, testing out the name. "I like the sound of that." That night, in the quiet of their bedroom with the stars visible through the window, Yates made love to his wife with tenderness and passion. Josephine had been nervous, the memory of Boston's betrayal still capable of causing phantom pain, but Yates was patient and attentive, making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. Afterward, lying in his arms, Josephine realized that she had not just survived the frontier. She had conquered it. She had proven to herself and everyone else that she was stronger than anyone had believed. And more than that, she had found something she had stopped believing was possible. Real love, honest and true and built on mutual respect. The next months were a time of adjustment and joy. Josephine continued teaching until the school term ended in May, then spent her summer learning the rhythms of ranch life. Yates taught her to ride properly, to help with the cattle, to understand the delicate balance of water and grass, and whether that determined success or failure in this harsh land. She learned that she loved the physical work, the way it tired her body and quieted her mind. She learned that she had a knack for the business side of ranching, helping Yates plan for the future and make smart decisions about when to buy and sell. She learned that partnership with the right person could make even the hardest work feel manageable. In August, almost exactly a year after her arrival in Malad City, Josephine discovered she was pregnant. She told Yates one evening after dinner, suddenly nervous about how he would react even though she knew it was foolish to worry. "Really?" he said, his face splitting into the widest smile she had ever seen. "We are going to have a baby in the spring," Josephine confirmed. "Late April or early May, the doctor thinks." Yates swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing. "A baby," he kept saying. "Our baby." That winter, Josephine took a break from teaching to focus on preparing for the baby and helping Yates with the ranch. They spent the long, dark evenings talking about names and making plans, dreaming together about the future. Josephine wrote in her journal, recording everything so that someday their child would know the story of how his or her parents met and fell in love. The baby came in late April 1880, after a long labor that had Yates pacing the floor and driving Dr. Morrison crazy with his anxious questions. But finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, Josephine delivered a healthy baby boy. "He is perfect," Yates said, cradling his son with wonder and fear. "Josephine, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas, after Josephine's brother who had given her the courage to come west in the first place. Little Thomas had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination, apparent even in his first days of life when he nursed with single-minded intensity. Josephine returned to teaching that fall, bringing Thomas with her to the schoolhouse. The students were fascinated by the baby, taking turns gently rocking his cradle when he fussed. It was unconventional, but this was the frontier, and people made things work however they could. Life settled into a pattern over the next few years. Yates worked the ranch, gradually expanding their herd and their acreage. Josephine taught and helped with the business and raised Thomas, who grew into a sturdy, adventurous little boy. In 1882, they welcomed a daughter, Margaret, who was quieter than her brother but no less fierce in her own way. The ranch prospered, not because anything came easily, but because Yates and Josephine worked together through droughts and harsh winters, through cattle disease and market fluctuations. They learned to lean on each other, to trust each other's judgment, to celebrate victories and weather defeats as a team. The town prospered too, growing from a rough frontier settlement into a real community. More families arrived, more businesses opened. The school grew until Josephine had to hire an assistant teacher to help manage all the students. The church added a bell tower. The saloon got actual glass windows. Through it all, Josephine and Yates remained at the center of each other's lives. Their love deepened and matured, tested by life's challenges and strengthened by their commitment to each other. They learned each other's moods and rhythms, developed private jokes and shared memories. They argued sometimes, usually about small things like whether to plant more hay or how strictly to discipline the children, but they always talked through their disagreements and found solutions together. On their 10th anniversary, Yates surprised Josephine with a trip to Salt Lake City, the farthest either of them had traveled since their marriage. They stayed in a real hotel, ate in restaurants, and walked through streets that reminded Josephine a little of Boston, though she no longer felt the pull of her old life. Her life was in Malad City now, on the ranch with Yates and their children. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked her one evening as they sat on the hotel balcony. "Leaving Boston, coming to the frontier?" "Never," Josephine said without hesitation. "My life in Boston was built on expectations and appearances, on trying to be what other people wanted me to be. My life here is built on truth. This is who I really am." "Who is that?" Yates asked, curious. "I am a teacher and a rancher's wife and a mother," Josephine said. "I am someone who rode 40 miles through the night to save a life. I am someone who survived a scandal and rebuilt herself somewhere new. I am someone who learned that she was stronger than she ever imagined. And I am someone who loves you more than she thought it was possible to love another person." Yates pulled her close and kissed her temple. "I told you that first day that you would make it. I told you I believed in you." "You did," Josephine agreed. "And eventually I believed in myself. That was your gift to me, Yates. Not just your love, but your faith. You saw who I could become before I could see it." The years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of ranch and family life. Thomas learned to ride and helped his father with the cattle. Margaret showed a talent for teaching and spent hours helping Josephine prepare lessons for her students. In 1885, another daughter arrived, Helen, who had her mother's green eyes and a laugh that could light up a room. Yates and Josephine added onto the cabin, building more rooms to accommodate their growing family. They built a new barn, a chicken coop, a root cellar for storing vegetables through the winter. Every improvement was a testament to their hard work and dedication. Every fence post and board a piece of their shared dream. The town continued to look to Josephine as a leader, asking her to serve on the school board and to help organize community events. She discovered that she had a talent for bringing people together, for mediating disputes and finding common ground. She never forgot where she had come from or how it felt to be doubted and dismissed, and she made sure to welcome every newcomer with the kindness she had once desperately needed. Martha Bennett passed away in 1887, and at her funeral, people spoke about her sharp tongue but kind heart. Josephine mourned her, remembering how the older woman had eventually become a friend and supporter. She took over running the boarding house for a few months until a new owner could be found, managing it alongside all her other responsibilities, because that was what frontier people did. They helped. They stepped up. They took care of each other. As the 1880s drew to a close, Josephine looked around at the life she had built and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in August 1878 felt like a different person entirely. That woman had been broken by scandal, uncertain of her worth, afraid of trusting her own judgment. The woman Josephine had become was confident and capable, secure in her identity and her place in the world. In 1890, on a warm summer evening, Josephine and Yates sat on the porch of their ranch house and watched their children play in the yard. Thomas was 16 now, already helping run the ranch and talking about someday having his own land. Margaret was 14, a talented teacher who sometimes led the younger students in their lessons. Helen was 5, full of mischief and energy. "We did well," Yates said, reaching for Josephine's hand. "With the ranch, with the kids, with everything." "We did," Josephine agreed. "Though there were times I was not sure we would make it. Remember that drought in '82? I thought we might lose everything. But we did not. We held on, worked harder, found a way through. That is what we do." Josephine squeezed his hand, marveling at how after 12 years of marriage his touch could still make her heart skip. "I am so grateful for you, Yates, for everything you have given me, this life, this family, this home." "You gave yourself those things," Yates said. "I just loved you while you found your way to them." As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the scandal in Boston that had felt like the end of the world, but had actually been the beginning of her real life. She thought about stepping off that stagecoach into the heat and dust of Malad City, terrified but determined. She thought about Yates, who had believed in her when no one else did, who had given her the space and support to believe in herself. The frontier had tested her in ways she never could have imagined. It had pushed her beyond her limits, forced her to discover strengths she did not know she possessed. It had been hard and sometimes lonely and often uncomfortable. But it had also given her freedom, purpose, and love beyond measure. The town that had said she would never survive had become her home. The people who had doubted her had become her friends and neighbors. And the cowboy who had believed in her had become her partner in every sense of the word, the great love of her life. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had gone back to Boston?" Yates asked. "If you had given up that first week when everyone was against you?" "I know what would have happened," Josephine said. "I would have spent the rest of my life wondering who I could have been. I would have stayed small and scared, letting one mistake define me forever. Coming here, staying here despite how hard it was, that was the best decision I ever made. Even better than marrying me," Yates teased. "That was the second best decision," Josephine said with a smile. But I could not have made it if I had not made the first one. I had to learn to stand on my own before I could stand beside you." As darkness fell and the children were called in for bed, Josephine lingered on the porch a little longer. She looked up at the stars, brighter here than they ever were in Boston, and felt a profound sense of peace. This was her life, earned through courage and persistence, and the willingness to keep going when everything in her wanted to quit. The years after 1890 brought new challenges and new joys. Thomas married a local girl named Alice and started his own ranch on land adjacent to his parents'. Margaret went to a teacher's college in Pocatello and returned to take over as head teacher when Josephine finally retired in 1895. Helen showed an early talent for music and convinced her parents to send away for a piano, which arrived in pieces and had to be assembled in the parlor. Yates's hair went gray at the temples, and Josephine found wrinkles around her eyes when she looked in the mirror. But they aged together, still partners, still best friends, still in love after all these years. They took walks around the ranch in the evenings, talking about the day's events and planning for the future. They made love with the comfortable passion of long marriage, knowing each other's bodies as well as they knew each other's hearts. In 1896, they celebrated the birth of their first grandchild, Thomas and Alice's son. Holding the tiny baby, Josephine was overwhelmed by the continuity of it all, the way life kept moving forward through generations. This child would grow up on the frontier, but it would be a different frontier than the one she had known, more settled and civilized. He would have opportunities that had not existed when his grandparents first arrived. "What do you think the next century will bring?" Josephine asked Yates as they rode home from visiting the baby. "I do not know," Yates admitted. "More changes, probably, more progress. The world keeps moving faster." "I hope some things stay the same," Josephine said. "I hope people still value hard work and honesty. I hope they still help their neighbors. I hope they still believe that someone can come from somewhere else and make a new life here. As long as there are people like you in the world, those things will survive," Yates said. "You proved that courage and determination matter more than where you come from or what happened in your past. That is a powerful lesson." As the 19th century drew to a close and the 20th approached, Josephine found herself thinking more about her legacy. She had kept detailed journals over the years, recording not just the events of her life but her thoughts and feelings, the lessons she had learned. She decided to organize these writings, to create something that her children and grandchildren could read and understand. The project took her 2 years, working in the evenings after her other chores were done. She wrote about Boston and the scandal, facing those painful memories honestly for the first time. She wrote about her arrival in Malad City and the kindness of strangers like Sarah and the cruelty of others like Martha in those early days. She wrote about Yates and their courtship, about the ride to Pocatello that had changed how she saw herself, about building a life together one day at a time. When she finished, she showed the manuscript to Yates. He read it over several evenings, sometimes laughing at memories she had captured perfectly, sometimes getting misty-eyed at particularly emotional passages. "This is wonderful," he said when he finished, "but you left something out." "What?" Josephine asked, worried she had forgotten some important event. "You never fully explained what happened in Boston. You talk around it, but you never say exactly what the scandal was." Josephine was quiet for a moment. "I suppose I am still ashamed, even after all these years." "You have nothing to be ashamed of," Yates said firmly. "Whatever happened, it was not your fault. You were young and someone took advantage of that. But if you are going to tell this story, you should tell all of it, not for other people but for yourself, so you can finally let it go completely." So Josephine added a chapter, painful but cathartic, explaining how she had met a charismatic professor at a literary salon, how he had courted her with poetry and promises, how she had believed him when he said his marriage was over, and he was only waiting for the right time to leave his wife. She wrote about the devastation of discovering he had lied about everything, that he had no intention of leaving his wife, that she was just one of many young women he had seduced with the same lies. She wrote about the confrontation when his wife found out, about the way society had blamed Josephine while excusing him, about the letters and whispers that had made Boston unbearable. Writing it all down, seeing it in black and white, Josephine realized how young she had been, how naive and trusting. She could forgive that girl now, could see that she had been a victim of a manipulative man's lies. The shame that had haunted her for over 20 years finally loosened its grip and let go. "I am free of it," she told Yates when she finished the new chapter. "I can look at what happened without feeling like I deserved it. Thank you for pushing me to write it. You did the work," Yates said. "I just gave you a little nudge in the right direction, like you did for me all those times when I doubted myself or wanted to give up on something difficult." In 1900, Malad City held a celebration to mark the new century. There were speeches and music, food and fireworks. Josephine was asked to speak about the town's history, about the changes she had witnessed over 22 years. She stood before the gathered crowd and looked at the familiar faces, young and old, seeing the community she had helped build. "When I arrived here in 1878, she said, "I was running from something. I was broken and ashamed, certain that my life was over at 23 years old. This town did not make it easy for me. Many of you doubted I would last a week, and I do not blame you for that doubt. I looked like someone who would fail." There were a few nervous laughs from the audience, people who remembered their skepticism. "But someone believed in me," Josephine continued, looking at Yates where he stood with their children. "Someone saw past my fancy clothes and city manners to who I might become if I was given a chance. That belief gave me the courage to keep trying, even when everything was hard, and eventually, I began to believe in myself too." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "The frontier asks a lot of people. It demands strength and resilience, the willingness to work until your body aches and then work some more. It takes everything you have and asks for more, but it also gives something precious in return. It gives you the chance to discover who you really are. It strips away pretense and shows you what you are made of. And if you are lucky, if you are brave enough to keep going, it gives you a life built on truth rather than appearances." The crowd was silent, listening intently. As we move into this new century, as our town continues to grow and change, I hope we remember what makes this place special. We help each other. We believe in second chances. We judge people not by where they came from but by who they prove themselves to be. Those values made it possible for a frightened woman from Boston to become a teacher, a wife, a mother, a member of this community. Those values can make anything possible. The applause was thunderous, and Josephine saw tears on many faces. After the speech, people lined up to thank her, to share their own stories of arriving in Malad City and finding acceptance and opportunity. It reminded Josephine that her story was not unique, that the frontier was full of people reinventing themselves, running towards something or away from something, or both at once. The first decade of the 20th century brought more changes. Automobiles began appearing on the streets, though horses were still more reliable. A telephone line was installed, connecting Malad City to the wider world. Margaret married a lawyer from Pocatello and moved to the city, though she visited often. Helen, true to her independent spirit, announced that she wanted to go to college in California and become a concert pianist. California, Josephine said, her voice higher than normal. That is so far away. Boston to Idaho was far away too, Helen pointed out with 17-year-old logic. You did not let distance stop you from living your life. Josephine could not argue with that. So in 1903, she and Yates put their youngest daughter on a train west, trusting that the courage and strength they had tried to instill in her would be enough to keep her safe. It is hard letting them go, Josephine said to Yates that night. I know they have to make their own lives, but I miss them already. They will come back, Yates assured her. Maybe not to stay, but they will come back. This place is in their blood now, just like it is in ours. He was right. Thomas remained on his ranch, expanding his herd and becoming one of the most successful cattlemen in the valley. Margaret visited every few months, bringing her growing family to stay at the ranch. Even Helen, busy with her music studies, came home for holidays and long summers, filling the house with piano music and laughter. Josephine and Yates settled into the rhythms of older age, though neither slowed down much. Yates still worked the ranch every day, though he relied more on hired help now. Josephine volunteered at the school, mentored young teachers, and served on various town committees. They had more grandchildren, 7 in total by 1910, and their house was often full of young voices and energy. We are blessed, Josephine said one evening in 1912, their 34th anniversary. They were in their bedroom, getting ready for bed after a day of celebrating with family. We are, Yates agreed, though I think we made our own blessing through hard work and determination. We made it together, Josephine corrected. I could not have done any of this without you. Yates pulled her close, and even after all these years, Josephine felt that flutter in her chest, that sense of coming home that his embrace always brought. We were good for each other, he said. From the very beginning, we fit. Do you remember what you told me that first day? Josephine asked. When I was so overwhelmed and frightened, I told you that you needed someone to believe in you until you could believe in yourself. That was exactly what I needed, Josephine said. And you gave it to me freely, without expecting anything in return. I expected something, Yates admitted with a smile. I expected you to survive and thrive and become the amazing woman I could see hiding under all that fear. And you did. You exceeded every expectation. They made love that night with the tenderness of long intimacy. Bodies familiar but never boring, still able to surprise and delight each other. Afterward, lying in the darkness, Josephine felt profound gratitude for her life, for every choice that had led her here, for every challenge that had shaped her into who she was. The years continued their steady march. The Great War came and went, taking some young men from the valley and changing everyone who returned. The Spanish flu swept through in 1918, and Josephine volunteered as a nurse, helping Dr. Morrison care for the sick. She was nearly 60 by then, but still strong, still capable, still unwilling to stand by when people needed help. Thomas's oldest son, also named Yates after his grandfather, took over much of the ranch work as the senior Yates moved into his 70s. It was a gradual transition, carefully managed so that the older man never felt pushed aside or useless. Josephine watched her husband adjust to doing less physical work, channeling his energy into mentoring his grandson and planning for the ranch's future. In 1920, women gained the right to vote, and Josephine was first in line at the Malad City polling place. She cast her ballot with tears of joy running down her face, thinking about all the women who had fought for this moment, all the women who had not lived to see it. You would have made a good politician, Yates teased her afterward. You are smart, you care about people, you know how to get things done. I am too old to start a political career, Josephine laughed, but I am glad I lived to see this day. As the 1920s brought prosperity and change to America, Malad City evolved too. More modern conveniences arrived: electricity and indoor plumbing and paved roads. The town was no longer a rough frontier settlement but a small, thriving community with deep roots and strong traditions. Josephine and Yates had been part of that transformation, and they took quiet pride in what they had helped build. In 1925, they celebrated their golden anniversary with a party that brought together generations of family and friends. Josephine wore a dress Margaret had made for her, and Yates wore a new suit that made him look distinguished despite his age. They danced together to music played by Helen on piano, the same Helen who had once been the baby of the family, and was now a successful musician teaching at a conservatory in San Francisco. During the party, Margaret stood up to make a toast. "My parents' love story is the stuff of legend in our family," she said. "The city woman and the frontier cowboy who saw past what everyone else saw to who she could become. But what I admire most is not how they fell in love, but how they stayed in love. Through hardship and triumph, through raising 3 children and building a ranch, through 50 years of life with all its ups and downs, they remained devoted to each other. That is the real love story, the daily choice to honor your commitment and cherish your partner." Josephine squeezed Yates's hand under the table, and he squeezed back, their private language of affection unchanged by decades. The late 1920s and early 1930s brought the Depression, and even successful ranches like the Emersons felt the economic strain. Yates and Josephine helped where they could, extending credit at the general store they now part-owned, providing work for men who needed it, sharing food from their garden with families who were struggling. They had weathered so many storms together that one more seemed almost routine, though it pained them to see so many people suffering. "We have been so fortunate," Josephine said one evening as they counted their blessings. "We have our health, our family, our home. We have enough to eat. So many people have so much less. We worked hard for what we have," Yates reminded her. "But you are right that we were also lucky. Lucky in timing, lucky in opportunities, lucky in each other." In 1935, Yates fell ill with pneumonia. At 80 years old, he was not strong enough to fight it off easily. Josephine rarely left his bedside during his illness, reading to him from his favorite books, holding his hand, reminding him of all the reasons he had to keep fighting. "You are not allowed to leave me," she told him fiercely. "We have been together for almost 60 years, and I am not ready to be without you." "I am not going anywhere," Yates promised, his voice weak but determined. "I have more life to live, more grandchildren to spoil, more sunsets to watch with you." And he kept that promise, recovering slowly but steadily. By spring, he was back to his normal routine, moving more carefully but still engaged with life. Josephine breathed easier, knowing she had more time with the man she loved. They made it to their 60th anniversary in 1938, an achievement that few couples reached. The celebration was quieter than the 50th, just family gathered at the ranch. But it was no less meaningful. Thomas, now in his 50s, stood up to speak about his parents. "I have watched my mother and father love each other my entire life," he said. "I have seen them work together, struggle together, triumph together. They taught me that real love is not about grand gestures or poetic declarations. It is about showing up every day. It is about being a team. It is about believing in your partner even when they do not believe in themselves. Those lessons shaped who I am, and I hope they shape my children and grandchildren too." Later, when the party was over and they were alone, Josephine and Yates sat on their porch watching the stars. They had added a swing years ago, and they sat together on it now, moving gently back and forth. 60 years, Josephine marveled. "When I stepped off that stagecoach in 1878, I never imagined this. I could not have imagined you or this life or any of it." "The town said you would not survive the frontier," Yates reminded her, a teasing note in his voice despite his age. "But I knew better." "You did," Josephine agreed. "You saw something in me that I did not see in myself. You believed in me until I believed in myself. That changed everything." "You did the hard part," Yates said. "I just loved you. That was easy." "It was not always easy," Josephine said honestly. "We have had our struggles, our disagreements, our difficult seasons, but we always came back to each other. We always chose each other." "And I would choose you again," Yates said. "Every time, in every life, I would choose you." They sat in comfortable silence, two old people who had shared a lifetime, who knew each other's thoughts without words. Josephine thought about the journey that had brought them here, all the moments of fear and courage, doubt and faith, hardship and joy. She thought about the woman she had been, broken by scandal and terrified of the frontier. She thought about the woman she had become, strong and capable and loved. The frontier had tested her, pushed her, forced her to discover reserves of strength she never knew existed. But more importantly, Yates had believed in her. He had seen her potential when she could not. He had offered steady support without trying to control her or rescue her. He had loved her while she found her own way to courage and self-belief. That belief had been the greatest gift anyone had ever given her. It had allowed her to survive those first terrible weeks when the whole town doubted her. It had sustained her through the ride to Pocatello that proved her mettle. It had given her the foundation she needed to build a new life, a true life, a life she could be proud of. And from that foundation, from that initial belief and support, had grown something beautiful. A love that lasted 60 years and counting. A family that stretched across generations, a legacy of courage and resilience that would outlive them both. "What are you thinking?" Yates asked, reading her expression in the dim light. "I am thinking that I love you," Josephine said simply. "I am thinking that every hard thing I endured to get here was worth it. I am thinking that I am grateful, so deeply grateful for every moment we have had together. Even the hard moments. Especially those," Josephine said, "because those were when we learned we could depend on each other. Those were when our love proved it was real and lasting and strong enough to withstand anything." They stayed on the porch until the night grew cold, then moved inside to their bedroom. They helped each other undress with the practiced ease of 60 years together, climbed into bed and held each other in the darkness. "Josephine," Yates whispered. "Yes. I am still glad you came to Malad City. Still glad you stayed. Still glad you chose me. Always," Josephine promised. "In this life and beyond, always." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something extraordinary together. Outside, the Idaho night was vast and dark, the stars brilliant overhead, the wind carrying the scent of sage and promise. The frontier that had once seemed so hostile had become home, shaped by their hard work and devotion into something beautiful and enduring. Yates Emerson passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1940, 3 months after his 85th birthday. Josephine held his hand as he slipped away, whispering words of love and gratitude, releasing him even though her heart was breaking. He had given her 62 years of unwavering love and support, and she knew she was unspeakably blessed to have had him as long as she did. The funeral was well attended, the church packed with family and friends, with people whose lives Yates had touched through his kindness and integrity. Josephine stood strong through it all, drawing on the resilience he had helped her develop all those years ago. She grieved deeply, but she did not break. She was still the woman the frontier had forged, still capable of enduring. After Yates died, Josephine moved to a smaller house in town, leaving the ranch to Thomas and his family. She was 85 years old but still sharp and engaged with life. She spent her days reading, writing, visiting with family, and volunteering at the school she had helped build. She missed Yates with an ache that never fully went away, but she did not let grief consume her. He would not have wanted that. She lived 4 more years, watching her grandchildren have children of their own, seeing the world change in ways she never could have imagined. She saw war come again, taking some of her grandsons to fight overseas. She saw women take on new roles, working in factories and offices, proving what she had always known, that they were stronger than anyone gave them credit for. On a warm day in June 1944, Josephine Reeves Emerson passed away in her sleep at the age of 89. She was buried next to Yates on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together, the mountains rising in the distance, the land they had loved stretching out in all directions. At her funeral, Margaret read from her mother's journals, sharing the story of a frightened city woman who became a frontier teacher, wife, mother, and pillar of her community. She read about Yates and his unwavering belief, about the ride to Pocatello that changed everything, about building a life through love and hard work and refusing to give up. "My mother came to Malad City running from failure," Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion. But she found success beyond anything she could have imagined. She found purpose and community and a love that lasted a lifetime. Most importantly, she found herself. The frontier stripped away everything false and revealed who she really was, a woman of courage, intelligence, and strength. A woman who could survive anything. A woman who proved that believing in yourself is the first step toward becoming who you were always meant to be. And she had help with that belief, Thomas added, standing beside his sister. "Our father saw her potential from the first day. He believed in her when no one else did, including herself. That belief was the gift that allowed her to transform from a frightened newcomer into the remarkable woman we all knew and loved." Their love story was not just about romance, though it was certainly romantic. It was about partnership, about 2 people building something beautiful together, about the power of believing in someone until they can believe in themselves. As the mourners filed past the grave, each one had a memory to share. The former students she had taught who became teachers themselves. The women she had mentored and encouraged. The families she had helped during hard times. The countless lives she had touched simply by being who she was. Honest, brave, kind, and resilient. The sun set over the mountains that evening, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, and somewhere in the vastness of that western landscape, 2 souls were reunited at last. The cowboy who had believed, and the city woman who had learned to believe in herself, together again as they were always meant to be. Their love story became legend in Malad City, passed down through generations as an example of what was possible when 2 people truly committed to each other and to building something meaningful. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's care and later his son's care, a testament to the foundation Yates and Josephine had laid. The school grew and modernized, but a plaque in the entryway honored Josephine Reeves Emerson, the teacher who had believed education could transform lives because it had transformed her own. And in a small archive in the town library, Josephine's journals were carefully preserved, her words ensuring that her story would never be forgotten. Future generations would read about her fear and courage, her mistakes and triumphs, her journey from brokenness to wholeness. They would learn that the frontier was not just a place, but a state of mind, a willingness to face the unknown and discover what you are capable of becoming. Most importantly, They would learn that sometimes the greatest gift one person can give another is simple belief, seeing their potential, having faith in their strength, and loving them steadily while they learn to love and believe in themselves. That was what Yates had given Josephine, and it had made all the difference. It had transformed a scandal-scarred woman into a frontier legend, a teacher, a wife, a mother, a woman who proved that survival was just the beginning and that with courage and love, anything was possible. The end.